Hello, my name is Joyce Dubensky, and I am the CEO of Tannenbaum. I am really excited to be here tonight for what we're calling a courageous conversation, because I think it's an important subject to explore. And I think those courageous conversations, which we all understand differently, are harder and harder to have. I want to start by thanking the people who made it possible, because this would only happen because of Brooklyn Law School partnering with us, and because of the Muslim Law Students Association, Alina Islam Hashimi, and Farhana Hassan, and I hope I pronounced your names right, the Jewish Law Students Association, Esther Fever, and the Black Law Students Association, David Odeh, and I hope I pronounced that right. If I didn't, I stand to be corrected later. A quick word about Tannenbaum for those of you who don't know anything about us. Our full name is the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding, and we are about understanding, but we are also about actively combating religious bigotry, hatred, and violence. And so that the work that we do, and we've been doing it for over 25 years, involves very strategic programs that tackle religious prejudice in our daily lives in a range of settings, and also working with people who, because of religion, are prepared to put their lives at risk for peace in all conflicts. Now, that's our work every day, and it's something I'm happy to discuss with any of you later. But for now, we're going to focus on having a courageous conversation. And it seems to me, and we've been talking about this, we need them. As my colleague Mark Fowler said to me, it's not that we haven't been divided for a long time, but somehow, to me, the division feels different. And part of the difference is that what I hear all the time is, I can't talk with anyone. I can't, how do you go to Thanksgiving dinner, to Easter dinner, to Passover dinner? How do you celebrate a holiday with your family? Better to talk about the weather. And that's, I think, a problem. So I think we need these courageous conversations so that we can overcome the headlines, and we have to find ways to do it that work. So the plan for tonight. We're going to have a panel. I get to moderate it. I get to ask a lot of questions. People get to answer them. And then we're going to give you something to think about, each of you individually, and then ask you to, in small groups with people you do not know, to have a conversation about what you thought. Following that, what we're going to do is debrief, and then you get to network and ask me all those questions about the other things I mentioned about Tannenbaum. I'm going to start the panel part by introducing the people sitting with me. Arno Michaelis. No?
Speaking of mispronouncing names.
All right, Michaelis.
There you go, yeah.
I'm working on, I've known him for years. Is the author of My Life After Hate. Arno is what we call a former, because he spent a lot of his life as a leader in the white supremacy movement before he put that behind him. Sitting next to him is Mubin Shaikh, and he's another former. But he's a former who got bit by the jihadist bug and is co-author of Undercover Jihadi, and someone who used to recruit for the Taliban before he too moved beyond a life of extremism. Kiran, here we go, Thadhani.
Thadhani.
Oh God.
Not bad.
Thadhani, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I should have practiced. Is an expert on dialogue and youth leadership, and the director of global programming for Seeds of Peace. So we're going to start with some questions, and Arno, I'm going to start with a softball for you. Your mother was an artist, and your dad an insurance salesman.
Correct.
Intelligence tests say you're a genius, and you even liked school in the early days.
Yeah, there was a time, sure.
But from early on, you were a leader, and you had a propensity for violence.
I did.
And by the time you were 16, you were sporting swastikas and were a skinhead. Okay, so I have a theory that people move into extremism and are pushed toward it by various influences and things inside themselves and pulled. So there's a push and a pull toward extremism, and it doesn't happen for everyone. There are people who are experiencing the push and some pull and they don't jump, and there are people who do. So what nudged you toward extremism? How did you end up moving in that? What pushed you?
I think, like everything else, it's kind of a mixture of nature and nurture. A lot of this is just my personality type. I've always been kind of contrarian to whatever I saw were the prevailing winds of society. And if I was a little kid, I would just, if they told me I couldn't do something, then I have to do it. It was just things like that. In the late 80s, I saw the status quo as one of multiculturalism. It was when white kids first started listening to rap. It was when MTV was just getting big. United Colors of Benetton would have these billboards with these beautiful models of all these different complexions on it. And I just felt like society was one that promoted multiculturalism. If I would have felt that society was one of white supremacy, as it has been for the past 500 years, then I may have been motivated to act to oppose white supremacy. But because I saw the status quo as one of multiculturalism, that's what had to be opposed. So it was a lot more about just opposing whatever I saw as the status quo rather than having a position and starting there.
So what about the propensity to violence?
Again, I think it's a mixture of nature and nurture. I do a lot of workshops now with everyone from kindergartners to senior citizens and every religious background you can imagine, socioeconomic background. And one of my go-to workshops is called Hurt People, Hurt People. And it's really just an exploration of compassion and bearing witness to suffering. And it becomes a tool when you can walk around with that in your back pocket. If you encounter someone who's hostile to you, if you encounter ill behavior, you just remind yourself that the reason that person's acting that way is because they're suffering. And I truly believe that all human maliciousness comes from suffering. I don't think any happy, well-adjusted person has any cause to hate or to hurt other people. So in my case, my suffering was my father's alcoholism. And my dad was not a mean drunk, he was a fun drunk. When my dad was drunk, we were gonna light off fireworks and shoot guns. What could be more fun for a little boy than shooting off fireworks with dad and shooting pistols in the basement? But while he wasn't abusive, drinking puts a lot of pressure on the people around you. And I lived in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, and there were times when my mom had to work 2 jobs to keep the bills paid because my dad was too busy partying. And while I could really sense my mom's suffering as a kid, rather than be a good kid and be like, hey mom, I love you, I'm sorry you're suffering, how can I help? I would just distance myself from her and from my dad, who despite the disease he struggled with, loved me very much. And of course, the more I isolated myself from the people who loved me, the more I suffered. And I started hurting other people in my life. My first victim was my younger brother. And I know most siblings have kind of a degree of rivalry and bullying between them, but I would kind of take that to new levels. And
what do you mean?
I used to pin my brother down and take, how little kids don't like yellow mustard because it's just too spicy for them. I would pin my brother down and take a squeeze bottle of French's mustard and fill his nostrils till it came out of his mouth. And like, I thought that was just really amusing, and my brother would like come after me with a butcher knife. You can't really blame him. But that's where it began for me. That was where my bullying started. And it went from there to the school bus, to the schoolyard, to the streets. And it just kept escalating as I grew older.
Okay. What was the pull of white supremacy? I mean, I understand part of the pull apparently was that it was different. And
forbidden is really the right word. That's,
okay. Tell me more.
That's a huge pull for it nowadays. If things aren't going well in your life and you don't have a good self-image, one real easy way to bolster a sick self-image, and this is bolstering it in a sick way, it's not a genuine way to bolster it, of course, but is to, first of all, think that you know things that everybody else doesn't know. Like, I know what's really going on. This idea of like hidden knowledge, conspiracy theories, it's really just an ego exercise. When you're not comfortable with who you are and your ego's like doesn't have a lot of authenticity behind it, you want to be privy to this hidden knowledge. And so a lot of the ideological aspects of white supremacy is appealing in that way. To this day, that's a big pull factor for people getting involved in white nationalism. And the other pull factor, again, is just how frowned upon it is by civil society. For me, before I became a white power skinhead, I was a punk rocker, and I still love punk rock. I don't want to make it sound like punk is some kind of gateway drug to becoming a white power skinhead. But punk was a pretty big tent, and there's a lot of people in the punk scene who are like activists and really committed to social change and all kinds of good stuff. But to me, punk was just about breaking shit and pissing people off, like as much as you possibly could. And if you think a mohawk pisses people off, like try a swastika. Swastikas really piss people off. And I wasn't ignorant as to why, but I didn't care why. The history behind it didn't matter. In the same way, there's actually a ton of parallels between violent extremist ideology and addiction. Mm-hmm. And being an alcoholic, I can speak to from an alcoholic perspective as well. When you're addicted to heroin, you know damn well that it's wrong to go break into places and steal things to support your heroin habit, but you don't care. As long as you get your heroin, because that's your fix. That's what you're dialed in on. I knew damn well it was wrong to fly swastikas, and I knew why people were repulsed by them, but I didn't care because I got my fix from putting that symbol out into society.
Okay. All right, Mubin, your turn.
Mm-hmm.
So you grew up in Canada, and your family was pretty stable.
Yes.
And like your brother over here, you
joined the white supremacist gang. To convert them all to Islam. Or should I say, muahaha.
You're so bad. Okay.
It's that creeping Shakira.
That's right.
All right. So anyway, your family was pretty stable, middle class.
Pretty stable.
You had, like him, a meaningful experience. That's the word you used when we talked about it in school. You actually learned something. It influenced you and stayed with you over time. But at the same time that you were going to a public school where kids were mingling, you were also going to learn about your religion, and you were going to a separate school, an Islamic school, where you were memorizing the Quran without knowing what it meant.
Right.
So what you've described is that you too had, and the fabulous phrase, pubescent terrorism. So why did you become a pubescent terrorist when you had such a normal childhood?
That means terrors of the beard. So what you're describing, and I always pitch it this way as well, is that I went to Quran school, which is like a madrasa, right? Typical, but a very stereotypical one, like Indian, Pakistani backgrounds. They they don't learn the Arabic, right? So you're sitting on wooden benches on the floor, rocking back and forth, reading the Quran, not understanding what you're reading. There's no real Islamic studies training. A lot of that, I mean, curriculum has changed in modern time, I think, but there was still that rote understanding of Quran. I juxtaposed that with public school, where it was a caring, nurturing environment. You wouldn't get beaten if you read the Quran incorrectly. So this creates an identity crisis for me, which at least lays the foundation for one. As I get through high school, wasn't bullied, wasn't picked on, wasn't the victim of racism. We were the coolest kids. I had a house party. My uncle walked in on the house party. Shame and guilt. Oh my God, what have you done? You've defiled the home. People pray here. People read Quran here. Mubin, you bring these kuffar here. You know, so it was really bad. So 18 years old, I decide, you know, drawing from my cultural context, it's like Arno mentions nature versus nurture. So in my nurture, in that cultural context, in order for me to, you know, fix myself, to salvage my reputation, it was to get religious. And so I kind of swung the other way on the pendulum that way and became very extreme to cover up, if you will, to be born again, if I can borrow the Christian term. So I would end up going to India and Pakistan, and had my encounter with the Taliban, became enamored by the Taliban.
Excuse me, encounter. I had my encounter with the Taliban.
Yeah, everyone always gets me on that. Like, wait. What do you mean you just met them by chance? Actually, that's what I was with a group called the Tabligh Jamaat. I mean, some of you may know they are, maybe not. Yeah, they're fundamentalists, but they're completely apolitical. And so they're able to travel and organize and move all around the world. I mean, I've seen them in Jerusalem with my own eyes. So they're totally apolitical. They don't care for politics. But I ended up in a city called Quetta in Pakistan. And Quetta, it was like it's been the Taliban stronghold since 1995 when they were there. And one of the things that Tabligh Jamaat does is called Jawla. They go in the local area, talk to people, invite them to the mosque for the lectures that we're going to have. So I was walking around and I looked and I saw what I thought were other Tablighis, also beards, turbans, robes. So I came closer to them. There was a local Pashto guy who was speaking. I speak Urdu, but I mean, I don't think they spoke Urdu, whatever. So we went up to them and I was supposed to invite them to the masjid for the Tablighi event, but they were like, they had weapons in front of them. And so, you know, this was a complete, like, wait a second, these aren't Tablighis. And so basically they said to me, if you want to bring back, you know, the izzah of Muslims, the honor of Muslims, you can only do it through jihad, right? That is the core jihadist claim. I don't like using the word jihad, but jihadists will use that. That is the core claim. You have to be this caricature. This is a costume you have to wear. So I came back, my beard was like proper Taliban beard, wearing robes, you know, black turban. And we'll get into that, but I wanted to just piggyback off of what Arno was saying. Now that I dressed like that and I carried myself in that way of, yeah, we're militant, it gave you that sense of, all right, I'm something now, you know? So where did I go? I went to my 95 meeting with the Taliban, came back to Canada, and then kept up my recruiting until the 9/11 attacks. And then that's what really pushed me out of extremism. Then I was introduced to Sufism.
We'll get there.
We'll get there.
We'll get
The story
there.
gets better, I think.
So yeah, I want to, but you've said something else that we kind of debriefed before this in planning. So one of the things you kind of mentioned, which I thought was very interesting, you said you learned how to be an extremist by debating Christians.
Yeah, I was one of those, I was really like a Salafi, if you know the term Salafi, really takfiri. Takfiri are those people Muslims who excommunicate everybody. Like, you're never a good enough Muslim. And if you're not a Muslim, well, see ya, you're going to hell too. So in that Salafi takfiri mindset, one of the branches of that is debating with Christians, right? Now, there's a benign form of it, right? It's very scholarly, academic, where you debate the merits of the scriptural traditions of each religion, blah, blah, blah. But I was always very combative. When I read the Bible, I read it for the wrong reasons, okay? And I love this because with the Sufism, it's the complete opposite, right? The Sufi Sheikh said to me, he's like, Mubin, why are you debating the Christians? We all believe that Isa alayhi salam, Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, is going to come again. And when he does, we yield authority to him. So what's the problem? Why are you debating them? Like, you're never going to get them to, and my approach was one of really aggression and hostility. It was to destroy the other person's faith. I had to debate them to debunk their religion, and somehow that would make my religion more. So like this product that I'm selling you, Islam, it's the absolute truth, and what you got there is garbage. You might as well get rid of it and just buy my product. That's how it was. But it was so like the spirit was wrong, right? And so like you see this parallels with other kinds of extremism where like people end up blaming religion at large. And I always say, religion is like a hammer. You can either build a home with it or you can destroy a home with it. It depends on what your outlook is and how you apply it and implement it. So in those days, I was definitely very hostile to even Jews. Like even though I'm Indian, it's like, what's my problem with Jews? It's not like I'm Arab or have some like political cause that I'm related to. But are we getting to this?
We're going to get into the Jews, yeah.
All right, we always do, don't we? Ooh. Yeah. So.
Okay, so all right, there's more, but a hypothetical for both of you. I want you to close your eyes for a second, both of you, and I want you to put yourself totally back to where you were when you were enamored of the Taliban, Mubin, and when you were a leader of the white supremacist movement and a rock star recruiting people. Okay, now I want you to open your eyes and you meet me, and I tell you, I'm a white woman, I'm a Jewish woman, I'm a woman of a certain age, and I'm short. Now, what do you say to me?
Why are you here?
I'm here to ask you questions.
Okay. I'm very skeptical. I'm very apprehensive. I'm like, what's your angle here right now? What is this lady trying to do?
I'm trying to move you.
Okay. What does that mean?
We'll get into that in a minute. Arno, what do you say to a white Jewish woman of a certain age?
Are you coming at me with kindness or hostility?
Oh, he's getting qualifier questions in time.
Yeah, I just came up to you and I said, I see your swastika.
Yeah.
I'm a white Jewish woman of a certain age.
Okay. The first thing I would have done is to make a case that you weren't white.
And how would you do that? What would you say? The words you would say to me.
I would say that Jews are an Asiatic Semitic race and that they're not white. No matter how you look. That's the whole thing with whiteness. It's always been like kind of a moving goalpost from the get-go. And I would have been moving it all over the place, dealing with a Jew who claimed that
I'm
they're
not white.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're white.
Of course, I'm a proud Aryan white man, rock star, warrior for his people. Are we gonna like totally role play this?
We're doing that thing now.
Oh, it would go.
Okay.
Then I probably would have went on to the Holocaust as a hoax. And that the swastika is a symbol of my people, and I have a right to represent my people, and you and your Jewish cabal aren't going to tear it down anymore, and yada, yada, yada. That would have been the line of conversation.
Somehow I don't imagine it would have ended in yada, yada, yada.
I loved Seinfeld from day one. Serious, it was actually a big part of my turnaround.
We'll get into it.
Okay, we'll get there.
They just want to talk about the turnaround. Okay, so the other part of my theory is that people who are extremists can be both gently nudged and pulled away from extremism. Now, it's always your choice to leave, just like it was your choice to go in. But there are influences and conversations and things that happen. And you just asked the question, how are you coming at me?
Right.
Are you coming at me with aggression or kindness? Why did you ask that question?
Because the way I responded to people, even when I was at my very worst, was really dictated by how they came to me. So everything I did back then was meant to cultivate hostility. I had a shaved head. I typically had a bunch of scars and stitches all over me. I'm like tons of swastika tattoos, swastikas on my jacket, steel-toed boots. Like, you would have no mistake about who I was or what I was about if you saw me walking down the street, and that was by design, because I wanted people to get in my face. I wanted people to want to fight me. That's what I was trying to provoke. So when people reacted to me with hostility, with aggression, they were literally putty in my hands. And that's where I wanted the conversation to go. But when people treated me with kindness, when I was trying very hard to avoid kindness and to like create a world that's devoid of it, I was powerless.
Can you give an example of what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I dropped out of high school after sophomore year because I'm a gifted genius. I don't know if I mentioned that, but my mom says I'm a gifted genius, so what need do I have of high school? And her and my dad really did the best they could to try to keep me in high school, but they had already pretty much entirely lost control of me years earlier. And so my mom, being very practical, is like, well, if you're gonna leave home, you've got to get a job. I'm not paying your rent. We don't have the money to pay your rent. So she asked a high school friend of hers named Jack Cooper if he would give me a job. He had a t-shirt printing business. So he gave me a job printing t-shirts, which I started doing when I was 16 years old, third shift, 40 hours a week. And I was very good at printing these t-shirts. I was good at getting to work.
You're a gifted genius.
I'm a gifted genius, of course. So I print t-shirts like a gifted genius would. And so I was a good worker. I'd get to work on time usually, but I'd often be drunk or hungover from drinking earlier. And while I was at work, I was very outspoken about my racism. In case people couldn't tell just by looking at me, I would let you know, and I'd be very verbose about it, talking about the white race and how everybody's out to get us. And I'd try to recruit all the white guys I worked with. And I'm always trying to like cultivate out of my Black and Latino coworkers like some kind of separatism from them. Mm-hmm. And so as I'm at work shooting my mouth off about race and anti-Semitism, swastikas all over my jacket, it gets back to my mom that I was doing this at work and wearing swastikas to her friend Jack's place of business, and Jack is Jewish. So my mom called up Jack in tears, like really beside herself, saying like, I don't know where I went wrong, I don't know what to do with this kid. I would not blame you if you fired him. I'd fire him if I were you. And rather than fire me, Jack goes, he's a good kid. He's just going through a phase. And not only did he let me keep my job, he gave my skinhead buddies jobs. Back in the day, the guy I started the gang with and the band, his name was Pat O'Malley. Pat has since got out and has 180'd for the most part. Pat's voice nowadays, as then, makes my voice sound like a prepubescent Swedish boy. And he put Pat on the phone selling these t-shirts. So Pat would be cold calling all these t-shirt shops and malls around the country like, hey, do you want to buy some Metallica t-shirts? He actually sold a ton of shirts, actually. And here we are, like, just living engines of hypocrisy. We would say that the Jews are taking all of our money to give to lazy black people who don't want to work, when we work with Black and Latino people who work circles around us, and actually many times my black coworkers would feed me. When I would be in the corner of the lunchroom, like hungover and starving because I'm too much of a drunk to pack my own lunch, I had a black coworker who's like opening up his lunch. He's got a sandwich cut in half, and he's like, "Hey, skinhead, you want half this sandwich?" And I'm not going to take a sandwich from a black man. I'm superior, but I'm actually kind of hungry. So I would be telling this story that the world was supposed to revolve around, when in real life is hard contradicting with everything I'm saying on a daily basis. And that hypocrisy was driven home by the kindness of my coworkers and the kindness of my boss.
Cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. It's a non-complimentary response is also another term for it. And it basically like jars the subject kind of out of their mental space because they're expecting one kind of reaction and they get the complete opposite. And those acts of kindness, which by the way, like I've never attacked someone who was kind to me. Usually I'd go scurrying out of there like as soon as I could. I'd just like flee the scene. I didn't want to be anywhere near this humanity that's messing up my whole program. So
Like the woman at McDonald's? Was it McDonald's?
Yes, the McDonald's. There's a McDonald's story as well.
Tell them that one quick, Corey, 'cause
You
I
really
have
want to
like-
hear the McDonald's story?
Yeah, I like that one.
You guys would like be out there with lighters, like, do the McDonald's story.
It's a good story.
It is a good story. So early on in my skinhead days, at the same time when I dropped out of high school, left home, because I'm a gifted genius, I figured if I ate nothing but ramen noodles all week, I'd have more beer money. And by ramen noodles, I mean the 10 for $1, like little bricks you get, not like a good, legit bowl of ramen like I love nowadays. So all week long, I ate nothing but these brick ramen noodles. And the only day I'd have something different to eat would be on payday, which was Wednesday, when I'd go to McDonald's and I'd get a Big Mac. And I still, when I go by a McDonald's, I'm like, I remember those days where I was just like, oh, is it payday yet? I can't wait to get that Big Mac. And it didn't occur to my gifted genius self that if I didn't drink as much, I may have been able to afford more Big Macs. I don't know what was really more damaging to me health-wise, but I go into McDonald's on my first payday, I get the Big Mac, but as I walked in, I'm kind of like taken aback because behind the counter is this elderly black woman who's working there, and she has this smile on her face which is just so authentic. And so like everything that's good about being a human being is all embodied in this woman's smile. And this smile is like the sun. The sun shines on everybody. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. If you're rich, poor, who you're attracted to, the sun is just there, and that's how this woman's smile was. And that smile made me really uncomfortable because I'm trying to hate black people, and I see this sweet old lady with this smile, and none of it's functioning. So I'm kind of discombobulated. I go get my food. She's really nice. I get out of there. A week goes by, printing t-shirts, drinking, fighting, making white power music. Payday again, go to get my Big Mac. There she is again. This time she remembers me, and remembers what I ordered, and she's asking me about my day and talking about the weather. And again, I'm like really just like, yeah, okay. And I get my food and I go scurrying out of there. The next Saturday after that payday, again, because I'm a gifted genius, I thought it'd be very clever to get a swastika tattooed on my middle finger. And that's specifically so that if people want to get in my face, I can be like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? Like, I want to provoke fights. And I certainly wasn't thinking of the lady who worked at McDonald's when I got the tattoo. But when that next payday came and I go in for my payday Big Mac, I kind of froze in the doorway because there she is again behind the counter. And I just had this, it was almost involuntary. I got this like voice inside, like, I don't want her to see this tattoo. And I put it in my back pocket, and I'm sitting there at the door, and I'm like, does anybody else work here? Like, waiting for somebody else to come up, nobody does, and then I'm thinking like, where's the next closest McDonald's? Like, it's a good like 6 blocks away, it's winter, it's freezing, I'm hungry. Ultimately, the siren song of the Big Mac prevails, and I go up to order it, and I'm just gonna keep my hand in my pocket, and she won't see it. So not thinking that I have to get money out of my pocket, and how you're going to do that without showing the top of your hand doesn't work. So I'm trying to like do that, and I'm squirming her all around, but she sees my finger as I took the money out, and she just goes, "What is that on your finger?" And I was already 6'3" by that time. I was a good foot taller than her, but I felt about 6 inches high when she asked me that. And all I could do was just stare down at my steel-toed skinhead boots and just be like, "It's nothing." And she waited until I looked up again, and when I did, she goes, "I know that's not who you are. You're a better person than that." And I'm just like, "Can I have my Big Mac, please?" And I got my food, and I scurried out of there, and I never went back. I started going to different McDonald's.
Okay. So Mubin,
Yes.
he had experiences that included conversations and very brief exchanges. What pushed you out? You worked with a Sufi master to explore your faith and understand it, and to really understand it after 9/11. Because for you, 9/11 was a moment that said, something's wrong with this.
Yeah.
So, were there conversations then? You kind of talked about it a little bit a while ago, about how he challenged your thinking.
Yeah, so Sufis are like Jedis of the Muslim world. Okay, and like Salafi, Takfiri, also known as Wahhabi sometimes, which isn't a real word, but they're like the Sith. We both draw from the Force, right? One does it malevolently, the other does it creatively, right? Positively. So 9/11 happens. It was Tuesday morning, I was driving to work. I actually said Allahu Akbar when the plane hit the building, the first plane. I went to my workplace and we were talking, somebody else came and said, "Hey, plane has hit the building." And I said, "No, I already said that." And they said, "No, a second plane." So then I was like, "Oh shit. And please don't let it be Muslims," something we've been saying forever now. And that later that day, so I went home during lunchtime. My wife is watching the TV. Everything is like, people are calling my house, my Muslim friends, because they've seen me go off and become more extreme. And my non-Muslim friends who are like, "Sheikh, is this what you've become?" Because I went from a complete like partying regular guy to beard, turban, robes, like hardcore Muslim, right? And then later that day, I went to see the bad friends who were quite, happy that it happened. And so there's a moment where my buddy, he goes, "Yeah, but, how do you justify like flying planes into buildings? Like these are non-combatants, there are rules of engagement with jihad, and this breaks them all." So he's like, well, there's a pause, and then he says, well, they're all kuffar anyway. Now, and then so my friend kind of looked at me too, that don't sound legit, So it was just a little moment and just a little exchange, but it had a mark on me. And then later on, what I ended up doing, I sold all my stuff. I said I need to study Arabic Islamic studies, so I moved to Syria. This is 2002, before the war. I was there for 2 years. In 2003, the Iraq War happened. But I was there legit, like to study. Now the bad friends back home didn't know that I had this change of heart. They thought I was going to escalate because now I had gone to Syria. And there was talk about going to Yemen and different places. And so the Sheikh, I named my son Mujahid, right? One who does jihad. And so my kunya would be Abu Mujahid, which is like the coolest jihadist name, right, that you could have. So in class, when you introduce yourselves, you say Abu so-and-so. So I was like, "Ana Abu Mujahid in Canada," and then everyone was like, "What?" And I realized in Syria, this big beard, turban thing is not really, they don't do that. I'm the go-lucky Canadian guy who's grown up in really an environment of privilege. So I go over there, and when they see a brown guy with a beard like that, it's Taliban. And I was actually called Taliban more in Syria than I was in Canada by white people or whatever. So, because if you're Arab, you're Al-Qaeda. If you're brown, you're Taliban. So the Sufi Sheikh, he chuckled right away, and he was like, "Abu Mujahid." He goes, "We'll speak after the class, but then we'll have." So eventually what ended up happening is I would meet with him twice a week. We would basically do tafsir of Quran, go through all the different, and what impacted me, I think, was definitely his demeanor and his approach to me. It was very like loving, you know what I mean? You could just see this guy was just smiling and happy and just like always wanted to, how I love how he always, you know, because people have different views, this and that, so he's just like, look, at least we can talk about the greatness of Allah, right? That's something that everyone can understand in the Islamic, you know, sects and groups and whatever else, at least that much. And so he would just start with that, and so for example, the first revelation that Islam believes was given to humankind is God said that my mercy prevails over my wrath. So number one. And then he says, now when we read Quran, we always say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. God, in the name of God, who is full of grace and full of mercy. So he just started there now. He goes, now, before you do anything, do you do it with grace and mercy? If you're not doing it with grace and mercy, you're not following. You're not following the religion. I don't know what you're following. And beautiful the way he said it. And so his demeanor, very loving, merciful, and the knowledge that he had. He's hafiz of Quran, memorized hadith, books of fiqh, this, that, the other, and he could cross-reference and this, you know, so all the verses. He said, okay, give me the verses that you use to, you know, push these ideas, you know, and so he just systematically debunked these ideas, and it is interesting. So we get to that because I completely pulled a 180, and I think I became an adversary of my old self is what I ended up doing. So maybe that's why I really hate, and I know I'm using that word, terrorists. I have hatred for them, really I do, I'm being honest. I think because of what they've done to my religion, but that I used to be like one of them, you know, and so I think maybe to distance myself from them. But anyways, the conversation part was his approach, the content, the knowledge that he came at it with. I think those two were most impactful on me.
So I have a bunch more questions, but I want to turn to you for a moment. Seeds of Peace, as I understand it, really identifies youth with the power and the capability to lead, and then works with them from different communities and across differences to develop ways of proactively leading toward peace, and if you will, sowing peace. And that is the work of the organization. It's an extraordinary organization, and that's my own summary of it for the record. I did not read that on their website. Your methodology includes dialogue, which, as I understand dialogue, it's different from having an everyday courageous conversation like the woman in McDonald's who had a momentary conversation with you. And there's a theme in what both of you said, that when people conducted themselves with kindness, it disarmed you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I find very interesting as a theme. And but in terms of dialogue, that's also a tool and a resource for having courageous, it's another type of courageous conversation. And deliberately in your, at Seeds of Peace, with people who may not share your values. So can you tell us how you define dialogue and why it offers a practice that can be useful for people that they can use?
Yeah, sure. I think I agree that those are conversations, but I think maybe my analysis from what I heard, and thank you for sharing your stories, was that in both of your experiences there was this question of, as a teenager at some point, that I think we have, it isn't just teenagers, people have all throughout their lives, of who am I? Like, who is this person? Who am I as I exist in the community that I am, in the body that I am, in this larger like system and structure that I'm a part of? And I think that is really, that's like where dialogue enters, because it says the first like really big core to it is not kind of like Muslim versus Christian, like who are you, who am I, let's hash this out and find a winner. It's really who am I, who are we, and then who is this larger us. And so I don't know if that's the most like pretty definition, if you will, but I feel like that is very true to your story. So even the encounter that you told at McDonald's is so beautiful, because this woman like was seeing a part of you that was you. And you know, like you're constantly asking this question, like, who am I? And then also in seeing her, you're like, oh shit, like who is us? Like, right? And so then I think I do very much agree. I think kindness is critical in all of this, but what dialogue allows us to engage with is how we all hold power, how young people hold power, how communities hold power, and how we can, perhaps it's not like, going back to does Islam win or does Christianity win, but like what the hell that we do that we all exist here? Like how are we moving forward together if we all show up to the table? And so I agree, yes, we work with incredible young people from all over the world who are leaders, but like I joke with my colleagues, like I think dialogue is for the ordinary. I don't think it's just for leaders. I think it's for like my neighbor as much as it is for people in office. And so, yeah, I think that's how, kind of essentially how I would describe dialogue. And as far as like how it's useful and how it's a tool.
Before you get to that,
sure,
let me ask you a little bit more about the dialogue process, because my understanding, having been in intergroup relations for a long time, is that dialogue is an intentional process. And so in that sense, it differs from a conversation and a courageous conversation. But it requires courage. And it's a commitment over time, often with the same group of people. And so, can you talk more about how you do that?
Yeah, sure. So yes, dialogue is, as we do it, is a facilitated process. We work in India, Pakistan, in Israel, Palestine, in Jordan, and Egypt, and then also in the US and the UK. So how our approach over the past 26 years has been, I mean, the context of those spaces has changed a lot in the 26 years that we've worked in. And so there's very many different kind of models of entry there. I think some key takeaways that we've found is there is a high importance for intra-group, so perhaps you could take Palestinians and Israelis coming together to have dialogue, but really the work and prep that needs to happen is the first with the individual, and then if it is a specific group coming together, that they are also able to have dialogue. So for instance, my Palestinian staff always say, like, we actually need to work together. Like, what if all of our identities as Palestinians is not the same, which is real. Like, not every American is the same, not every Israeli is the same, and so that is one layer of the work, and you could call it intergroup, but there's still significant dissonance, and so I think that's why the individual work is so critical. And then when people are coming together, that they're, whatever those lines of difference are. In our US program, for instance, we recruit young people from 5 different areas of the country, rural, urban backgrounds, all different socioeconomic backgrounds. And what they're bringing to the table is very different from what our Indian and Pakistani young people are bringing to the table, but the core is still the same. It's who am I, who are we as we are together, and what's this larger structure around us? And I think there's a bit of an ebb and flow. As you said, it is sustained. Dialogue isn't an effective one-off, so we could all sit here and be like, oh, we did it, like we have overcome in our one-off dialogue. It has to be, we offer, like, the entrance to our program is a 2.5-3 week experience that young people come into. Then that work is sustained back in their communities that they go back to, and there is significant power in it happening with the same group of people. But I think, what we're able to experience is young people coming through our program in one season, then going back to their communities, sometimes hosting dialogue, actually sometimes wanting to have dialogue about different things. And so I think the key ask that I hear a lot is a need to be in dialogue because it's sustained. It's something you have to practice, you show up to. And so a lot of times people think of dialogue as a cure, like, oh gosh, things are tense, let's have a dialogue. When it's more, how do we make this a practice of life and communities and structures and systems around us? So it's not just this, things are sour, like let's have a dialogue. But it's something we all need and we all crave because it gives us those things that we're already asking for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you both moved out. Kindness helped push. Two quick questions. We're going to do this a little bit quickly so we keep the evening moving, because I can feel Dasha doing this to me. So what pulled you? You had, I know, a pull. You had pulls. And now both of you work with interrupting others and pulling them out of extremism. And you've used conversations on the internet to do that. And you've worked with some people by making them have some of what I keep calling cognitive dissonance experiences. So briefly, can you each talk to both? What pulled you, and at least one of the ways that you've used your techniques to pull people out? Mubin?
Yeah, okay. Interesting, okay. So I think what I ended up doing was replicating the approach of the Sheikh. So what ended up happening was, so just to finish my life bio, after I came back from Syria in 2004, I actually became a walk-in for the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. I became an undercover. I worked undercover with them for a couple of years. I infiltrated a terrorist cell. In 2006, there was a big arrest. 18 guys got arrested. 11 convicted, 7 got off because of my sympathetic testimony. Spent 4 years in court, 5 legal hearings, 2010 court cases done. Syrian war begins. So I watched in real time as ISIS basically came into creation. Well, I mean, they had a longer history, but the heydays of ISIS social media, really from 2013, including 14, 15, 16, and 17. By 18, they had been considerably neutered, we'll say. In that time, for my own interests, because I had gone through this personal experience and I had this operational experience, and I thought that I could apply this technique online with ISIS supporters in ISIS networks. So what I did is I created a number of fake profiles, and I gave them identities, right, and attitudes. So one cluster was aggressive, the other was passive aggressive, the third passive. All right, so I like aggressive is like you're gonna burn in hell, this and that, blah blah blah, really straightforward. Passive aggressive, you know what I mean? You're still gonna burn in hell. Oh, I'm sorry I said that to you. Maybe we should talk more, right? Like it was designed to interrupt. Like what the hell? Like this person's doing this, but like so you can't really quantify what that person is. And the passive one was just completely chill. No, even though they might have cursed me, or depending on what profile I had, I was still super nice to them, right? And the ones that I was super nice to were the ones that kept up the contact. And a lot of this stuff, was done just by myself. I had screenshots of interactions I had with people. I did take them, and now I use those screenshots in training. What's interesting, can I mention this? Okay, I'll mention it. It's psychological operations, right? Which is, can I say it, weaponized dialogue. Mm-hmm. So it's exactly what I did with those accounts, and I tested and measured this process. I mean, not so scientifically. I mean, I was kind of doing it on the go. It was happening, right before my eyes, so I might as well, do it and then just see what happens from it or what comes from it. So yeah, I think it's difficult though for a single person to, when you're dealing with like real accounts or bot accounts, it's very difficult also to exactly measure the impact of it, right? As the scientists would want to be real technical about. But at least let us both say, even if I can speak on behalf of Arno for a moment,
Of course.
Hindsight bias that we have, because we can remember in our periods of, let's say, intoxication, right, whether ideological or alcoholic, there were times where I believe, and I've seen it not only in myself but in others as well. There are times where you could be so deep in an identity or something where really truly there's nothing you can say to that person that's going to make them rethink their position, right? It's just not going to happen. They believe it 100%. Your own mother and father could tell you and they're not going to listen, right? So, but if you don't know where you are going to intervene in that person's progress. If they're in that point where it's just you forget it, then you join the list of other people that have come and done that, right? You join the cacophony of contradictory voices that they keep hearing. But for other people, depending on where you get them, you could have impact on them. I frequently think back to the people that I used to run into who would kind of give me counter messages, and I didn't listen to them, and I rejected them. But I still think about them. I'm 43 years old now, right? Like I'm long out of my old life, but I still think about them. So that's where I would leave it. Is that you can't know for certain, but you can know for certain that if you get them at the right stage, you will have an impact. You will.
For me, what pulled me out of the movement, and I'm going to talk about Seinfeld, whether you want to or not. All roads lead to Seinfeld in Arno land. Pop culture was a big part of it. I grew up like a TV, film, sports, music geek, and all of that stuff is forbidden to white nationalists. Everything out of Hollywood is part of the Jewish plot to kill all the white people, as is everything on TV, as is every bit of content that does not explicitly support your ideological position. And so when Seinfeld came out, I loved it as much as anybody else did in the early 90s in the depths of my skinheaddom. And my girlfriend loved it as well. And it was on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. on Channel 4, which was the NBC affiliate in Wisconsin. And my girlfriend worked at a bar, so I had to tape it for her. For you younger whippersnappers, we used to have these things called VCRs. They're about the size of a suitcase, and they blink 12 all the time. And if you were really clever, you could get it to record a TV show. And at the threat of withholding sex, I had to figure it out so that Seinfeld could be taped for my girlfriend, otherwise I wouldn't be getting any. And we couldn't write Seinfeld on the spine of the tape, because if my buddies came over and saw that on the bookshelf, I would make me a race traitor. That would be the term they'd use for me, and it would come up like in political maneuvering. Like, Arno can't leave the group, he's a race traitor. He watches that Jewish mind pollution on TV. He watches Seinfeld. Like, you can't get any more Jewish than that. And so we put it on a tape that said Amber's second birthday party, because we knew no one would ever ask to watch that. That's where we hid Seinfeld. And as ridiculous as that was, it wasn't lost on me how ridiculous it was. But like everybody else at the time, I would go about my day-to-day life like catching Seinfeld references everywhere. Wow, that guy talked really close to me. He's a close talker. Oh, hey, I'm gonna go have soup for lunch. Oh, hey, there's a limousine. Like every little thing you see brings Seinfeld to mind, and I'd chuckle about it like everybody else did, but then I'd also ask myself, so in your whiter and brighter world, does Jerry Seinfeld get to live there? Do you think he'd be very funny if you were killing all the other Jews? Like, how does that work? I'd ask myself those questions. And there's no good answer to that, other than like, I'm full of shit. Like, my life is a more joyous experience because of Jerry Seinfeld, because of Larry David, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Jason Alexander, like all these Jewish people who made that show as funny as it is, made my life better. So how is that jibe with all my anti-Semitic rhetoric? So that was definitely like a pull. And beyond Seinfeld, there was This Is Spinal Tap, which my band watched after every band practice, written and directed by Rob Reiner, starring Harry Shearer, like all this genius that Jewish people and people of color and all the people that we condemned like brought to the world. That was all forbidden to us. So I had to go sneaking around enjoying it, and that was a huge part of the exhaustion. Beyond that, the biggest pull was really from my daughter and from my parents. For all the struggles my parents had and for all my dad's challenges with his alcoholism, both my dad and my mom let me know at every turn that they loved me and they'd never give up on me and they wanted me back. So that combined with my daughter, with Seinfeld, with Spinal Tap, Blade Runner, Green Bay Packers, like all of these things. And of course, my boss, Jack Cooper, and my coworker, Lonnie, and the kindly old black woman who worked at McDonald's, like all these things had to fall into place to lead me out of that. So every single day I'm grateful for that. And when I work in intervention with somebody who's in a hate group nowadays, first of all, I tell them like, look, dude, everything you have to say to me, I've said a million times, probably better than you'll ever say it. So save all your rhetoric about the Jews trying to kill the white people. Like I heard it all. I've lived your life for 7 years. There's nothing new about that mindset that you're gonna tell me. What I challenge them to do is come live my life nowadays. And what I do nowadays is I go everywhere that they're terrified to go, and I do it with joy and I do it with gratitude. I'm much more comfortable being the only white person in the room than being in a room full of nothing but white people. Like diversity is comforting to me now rather than threatening. And newsflash, like diversity is the way of the world. That if you understand biology, if you understand zoology, like a diverse ecosystem is a healthy ecosystem. And that goes whether you're talking about a coral reef or a rainforest or Brooklyn. Like that's very much how systems of animals interact. So I challenge them to walk in my shoes, come with me for a day. I was able to bring a guy who was getting out of the Klan to Los Angeles and take him to Homeboy Industries, which is an amazing gang prevention intervention outfit. And that was like the point of no return for him. Is I introduced him to all these black and Latino people who had, as horrific as his life had been, which it was pretty bad. And I'm not one to put suffering on a scale, because we all suffer and it's all from our own perspective, but I wanted him to meet people that made his horrific childhood look like a church picnic, and they were turning their lives around. They were overcoming obstacles that he couldn't imagine, and he needed to learn from them. And first of all, and the first thing he understood, which he did as soon as he walked in there, is that he is in no way, shape, or form superior to them because of the color of his skin. So once I brought him there and he walked out of that place, and he was there for about 2 hours and he was like bawling constantly the entire time. I knew he was never going back.
Okay. So these guys are great, and I really have like a lot more questions, but I'm not going to ask them now, maybe later.